All right, Toastmasters, we got a good one for you today. Today I'm going to teach you about the thesis. I know, sounds boring, sounds ridiculous, but the reality is the thesis is incredibly important because what it is, it's the soul of your speech, right? A better analogy is it's like the engine of the car. I don't care how fancy the rims are on the car or how nice the paint is. If the engine isn't working, if you don't have a good engine, you don't have a good car. If you don't have a good thesis, you don't have a good speech. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the characteristics of a good thesis, and I'm going to point you at a couple examples, and we're going to revise them together, okay? So let's look at some characteristics of good theses. One, it can be encapsulated in one sentence. Remember, good theses are simple. Your speech can be complex, but if you can't articulate the idea in a simple fashion, it's probably convoluted. That's why if you can't articulate your thesis in one sentence, it's probably not a good thesis. Two, it's got to be interesting / arguable, right? Pick a thesis that is provocative, funny, controversial, and most importantly, arguable. Because if there's nothing to argue, if everybody already knows the thesis, then why exactly are you speaking about it? Three, it provokes change. This is probably the most important thing, right? You have to make sure that you're taking your audience somewhere. You want to take them from point A to point B. And if you don't know what point B is, you're probably not going to end up there. So now let's look at three theses and see how good they are. Number one, comedy. What do you think? Of course not. It's not a thesis at all, actually. It's a topic. That's a common mistake that we make as speakers, right? We start thinking about a speech, and we research it, and we come up with a general area of inquiry, but that's not the message. The message is an insight that comes after this. So you have to develop an insight, or else you don't have a thesis. Two, dogs are cute. What do we think? Good thesis? Of course not. We all know dogs are cute, right? You might be able to have a funny speech or an entertaining speech about it, right? Show some cute pictures of dogs, get people to ooh and ah. But the reality is, you're telling us what we already know. It's a waste of our time. Don't do it, right? Come up with something a little bit more creative. What if you said dogs are evil? Now, that can be a little bit more interesting, right? Because that could be a little bit controversial, it could be a little offensive. It causes you to have to stretch and really develop an argument that is going to change people's mind. So that could be the beginning of a good thesis. Finally, we have broccoli is good for your health, right? Again, what do we think? Not a good thesis, right? Because the reality is we all know that broccoli is good for our health. What if instead you wrote, broccoli is good for your soul? Now, that's a little bit of a variation, right? Because we don't traditionally think of broccoli being good for our soul, and so that already provokes some intrigue and is going to get me to listen, because that might be a speech that's worthy of listening to. And if you could change my mind on that, I think you've done a great service to the audience. So that's what you're here to do. You're here to serve the audience, and that's the reason why we need to have a good thesis. Because you can't serve the audience unless you know what you're serving them with, and unless you give them something interesting and compelling enough that's going to allow them to change. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you next time.